Welcome to Wide World of News. I'm Mark Halperin. We're talking today about the state of the planet regarding two important things. Travel. The travel industry is so vital, not just to the economy, but to human beings getting around the world, seeing relatives, attending celebrations, funerals. We need to have travel back on track, particularly as we head into the summer season. And we're also going to talk about climate change and the incredible distraction that dealing with the pandemic has caused for all countries, and not focusing on things that were top of mind before. And we're going to talk about climate change and how that effort can continue even under the circumstances we're dealing with now. Our guest today, Geoffrey Lipman. Geoffrey is a writer, a thinker, and activist on climate and other issues, and also a veteran of the travel industry. Geoffrey, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
I want to start by talking about travel and just your big picture take now on, let's start positive. What makes you optimistic that air travel, rail travel, hospitality, what do you see that makes you optimistic that we can return to the way things were before too long?
I'm not quite that optimistic, to be honest with you.
I didn't think you would.
I think it's like Dr. Fauci said, you know, the virus will determine this. And it's a whole new ball game for the world, not for travel and tourism, but for humanity, for living.
Right.
Every country in the world is affected by it. Nobody quite knows how to deal with it. And travel is one of the issues which is helping to spread it around. So I think, first of all, I think people will have difficulty in traveling simply because of controlling regulation. And secondly, I think that a lot of the appetite will have been taken away. I don't like to say this because I'm a pro-travel person, but I think it's a reality. When the virus is out there and you have to socially distance, you have to wear masks, you have to worry about whether you'll be quarantined when you come home, it's a massive disincentive to traveling, and the ultimate fear that you might infect yourself or infect other people. So I'm not so optimistic. Of course it will come back, and it will come back, I believe, at a lower level. I think the growth projections will be lower. I don't think we're going to see anything like a quote new norm this year. I think it's good. You know, people have written this year off. Many airlines are talking about 2023 for things to get back to normal. And that's speculation. We're all talking heads here, and none of us know.
If there is a vaccine, would that speed up the timetable? Is 2023 predicated on a vaccine in 2020, 2021, or if there's a vaccine?
I'm sure of that. I think back to the old days when we used to travel around, you remember, with yellow medical certificates. If you were going to certain countries where there was yellow fever or polio, particularly in Africa, and you couldn't get on a plane unless you had this yellow certificate. And the certificate said you have been vaccinated against these diseases, and therefore you're able to travel without becoming a risk. And I think if we get to that stage, it will help to give a push to the return to normality. But everything that I read tells me that we're not likely to get to that stage this year. And who knows, we might not get to that stage. There are serious diseases out there that don't have vaccines. So it's all speculation, and I'm assuming that it's going to be at least into the middle of 2021 before numbers get back to anything like they were before. And before the growth rates, which were running at 1% above GDP for travel, 5% per annum, I think we're not going to be looking at anything like that going forward. 1 or 2% if we're lucky.
Right. We've seen some airlines around the world already face a severe financial difficulty, and all airlines are now doing whatever they can to cut costs. Are we in danger of European airlines, American airlines, U.S. airlines going out of business in this process?
Yes. look, we live in a market economy of one form or another. We shouldn't be madly alarmed if one or two airlines or three, half a dozen airlines go out of business. The planes are still there. The staff are still able to work for other companies. That's the way the market's supposed to work. I think we've just become used in the airline system because of its close interaction with government that
Right.
we think it's impossible for airlines to go out of business. But many have. There's no Pan American, there's no TWA. These were very active airlines when I was growing
Right.
up as a young man in IATA 50 years ago. These were the dominant companies. Well, they're not
Right.
here anymore.
Right. I want to switch and talk about climate. You before the pandemic were involved in an area of intellect and activism that's, I think, so important and interesting, which is the ability to still have vibrant travel while dealing with the climate crisis. So can you just talk about, again, separate from the pandemic, what are the major hallmarks of the ideas that you've been working with to try to make it not inconsistent to have widespread domestic international travel while still dealing with the crisis?
Okay, let me try and put it very, very simply. There's absolutely no reason why travel should in any way be questioned if it's operating like the rest of industry. If its carbon footprint is reducing in line with the international agreements made in Paris, if it has plans and programs for that reduction, it shouldn't be under question as to whether it's a good or a bad activity. The challenge has been that activists have focused particularly on the aviation element, particularly partly because it's significant. It's the highest growing component of transport, and it's scheduled to keep growing because it's fossil fuel based, and there is as yet no alternative. So against that background, if travel gets its act together, we shouldn't have a problem with the climate. But we've always been approaching this issue from a we're special, we're different. So we've in a way created a rod for our own backs. People are saying, yes, you are different. And then this activist movement sprang up last year in Sweden, the flight shame movement, and people actually said, we shouldn't be traveling. Now, I believe that what we should be doing is looking for climate-friendly travel. We should be, companies and communities should measure the impact of the carbon footprint along with other things that they measure. We measure every other aspect of travel, the numbers, the jobs, the impact on trade. We need to put our carbon footprint in there. And then we need to have a plan for reducing it in line with what countries have agreed for the Paris Agreement, which is a 30, 40-year phase out starting now. It's a big challenge, but it's not one that we can't grasp if we face up to our responsibilities.
And specifically on aircraft, I assume you wouldn't to achieve your goals, the current fleet would have to be either heavily retrofitted or phased out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that. It sounds like a massive thing, but they have a life cycle of 20 years for an aircraft. We're talking about between now and 2050. It's not so much the aircraft, it's the engines. The engines run on fossil fuel. Most of the analysis says that there is not available or going to be available an alternative to fossil fuel. So whilst everybody else, every other form of transport has an alternative, you can have electric cars, buses, people can go on bicycles for short haul in a city. But if you've got the aeroplane portion increasing in relation to the decrease of everybody else, you're sitting out there like a sore thumb. So I have argued for some time publicly, we need to have a moonshot for a synthetic aviation fuel that is non-carbon based. And if you think about it, Mark, the big fossil fuel companies are still spending billions of dollars on exploration for new fields.
Yeah.
And they're spending much, much less looking for a synthetic aviation fuel. And it's not easy because it has to be compatible with the engines as they are. It has to be able to mix with existing fuel types. But, you know, given the huge amount of monies in companies like Shell and BP and the big airframe manufacturers, there's no reason why they shouldn't do it. And I've argued we should have a moonshot approach, like Kennedy did when he said, you know, we're going to put a man on the moon. And everybody should say, we have to get a synthetic aviation fuel which does not produce a carbon pollution, because aviation is so important. You can't walk between continents.
Is any country done advanced work on that to try to develop that kind of fuel?
There have been over 200,000 flights to date with synthetic aviation fuel. The international community, IATA, the Airline Trade Organization, ICAO, the government civil aviation organization, have got active working groups which are looking at the technicalities, the production, the deployment. And everybody says, well, we have to deploy it everywhere. But there's only a couple of thousand airports around the world that you have to deploy this fuel at. So it shouldn't be beyond the realms of humanity to find a way to do this. And as you know, because trade by air, because people moving by air is such an important part of society, as COVID-19 has shown, we have to make this an international priority.
I want to link up the two topics as we conclude here. Clearly, one impact on the climate crisis from the pandemic is there are almost nothing like the number of planes that were flying before. Is that having any material impact in the short term? Is that having some symbolic impact? If people stop traveling as much, is that going to be, as far as you're concerned, a good thing?
In climate terms, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated what a cleaner world is looking like. If you look at space agency maps of China, and you look at before and after the pandemic, and you see cities, the big cities, Beijing, Shanghai, I mean, they're black. You can't see the cities. Before COVID-19, now you can see everything. And it's the same thing, you know, I'm sure you've seen these maps of the number of daily flights across the North Atlantic, and they've disappeared. So yes, it's shown what a cleaner and, I believe, a better world can be like. In material terms, because we're so far advanced in this inevitable blanketing around the world, it's not been so significant. But we have to keep doing this kind of a transformation every year for the next 30 years, every year. And at that stage, we will have made a contribution to our part of solving the problem.
Given that, as you point out, climate is an existential threat to the entire planet rather than the serious threat to millions of individuals, why hasn't the world focused on climate the way they focused on the pandemic?
I think because it's not here at this moment. It's the pandemic hit us and we hit a wall. Jobs were lost, livelihoods went, families had no income, governments were passing massive stimulus packages, unprecedented. The people who previously had been saying, watch the deficit, were out there saying, hey, we've got to make more money, print more money. So everybody knows about this. And whereas climate change, it's going to hit us and hit us worse in 20, 30 years' time. We've seen examples of it. If you live in the Bahamas, you know about climate change because everything was suddenly wiped out in a massive hurricane. Then you know about it. But that doesn't show on national TV in the United States, for example. So there's a visibility and a proximity issue, and I've described it somewhere. It's the climate, the COVID-19 pandemic it was like somebody sticks a knife in you and you feel the pain. Whereas climate change, it's like that frog which gets in the slowly boiling water and swims about quite happily, dying.
Right.
And that's the differential. And on top of that, and I have to get this in, Mark, I have to say, you have leading your country at this moment, the most powerful country. All my life, I've looked up to the United States as a global leader. You have a narcissistic guy who simply does not understand the power of science, pulled the country out of the international agreement to deal with this. So a country that's providing 25% of the economy, 25% of the pollution gets pulled out because the guy running your country doesn't like to go into agreements that his predecessors signed. And until we get a United States government which is ready to play its part in the international arena, whether it's the World Health Organization or whether it's the Paris Climate Agreement, we will have a major challenge. Multilateralism is difficult. It means you have to make compromises, and it means you have to have a long-term vision of the benefits of everybody doing things together. Unfortunately, your president has none of those characteristics.
Geoffrey Lipman, with a position that I've heard from my share of European folks, not an uncommon view across Europe and parts of the rest of the world. Geoffrey Lipman, thank you very much for joining us.
Mark, thank you. It was a great pleasure to be with you.
And thank you all for watching Wide World of News. We'll be back with more conversations in the coming days. See you soon.